Now let us continue with our discussions related to the assessment and evaluation part of the course and the program. Our focus now is on the evaluations, which is meant to improve the course and the program. As a whole, there will be assessment, there will be analysis, and the analysis focus on the attainments of the CO and POs. We are still establishing and preparing for the evaluations. Before we really enter the discussions in terms of the analysis and the assessment, we will need to first make sure that everything is well established. If any part of them are not well established, whichever results as acquired and whatever the analysis outcome, it may not be meaningful or it may not be accurate or reliable. That's why in our previous videos, we talk about the course outline and also the teaching plan. Not only showing the typical contents within the course outline and also the teaching plan, we also discuss about some common mistakes and misconceptions while dealing with the course outline and the teaching plan, which personally I observe based on my personal teaching experience. We have mentioned about the content of the course outline and also demonstrate the content of the teaching plan. It was mentioned that the components available for the teaching and learning activities as well as the assessment strategy shall be aligned to the specifications of the course outline. However, the lecturers are given flexibility in terms of the teaching and learning methods as well as the distributions of the marks and the emphasis among different COs. Taking this as an example, different lecturers may adopt this differently. Same goes to the assignment. And later there will be distributions of the marks by the COs for the final exam or something which is equivalent to final exam, such as capstone projects. Now let us look into details how the marks are being distributed and how do we prepare ourselves for the analysis. We have coursework and we have final examinations. Coursework typically include the progress test, assignment, presentations, fieldwork report, lab report, and probably other evaluations methods. As for final exam or final exam equivalent, it can be final exam and also other evaluations method. Let's say now in your teaching plan, your progress test, you have 5 marks allocated for the attainments of CO1 and 15 marks for the attainments of the CO2. And now your teaching plan has been approved by your head of program and also your dean. Theoretically, you will need to abide to your initial plan here. We want at least 2 assessments for each CO. Same go to here, at least 2 assessments for the CO. Same goes to this. As for the teaching and learning methods, we also want at least 2 teaching and learning methods for each COs. The purpose here is to ensure a good variety in terms of the teaching and learning methods and also assessment methods in order to minimize the bias for the students who obviously have weaknesses over certain methods. Now that you know 5 marks to CO1, 15 marks to CO2 for your progress test, when you design for your progress test, make sure you will have 5 marks for CO1 and total 15 marks for CO2. Your total mark here is still 20 marks, which is in line to the specifications by the course outline. Let's say now your progress test is conducted in week 7 or week 8. Make sure you indicate at the remark here your progress test shall be conducted on week 7 or week 8. And then your progress test, let's say you have 3 questions here. First question 5 marks, second question 10 marks, third question 5 marks. Based on the distributions of the topic outcome, and observe the correlations between the topic outcome and the course outcome, you may set the questions accordingly. While setting your progress test questions, you may refer to the CO, which in this case is CO1 and CO2, and also you may refer to the topic outcome that are being mapped to CO1 and CO2. Since your progress test is conducted by week 7 or week 8, that means you are looking at the topic outcome and the COs related to those weeks that you have covered, and then design your questions accordingly. Later, once you've done the assessment, you will have a list of the students as well as their results. You will need to identify the result of each student for each questions. You will need this result for the analysis as well as for the evaluations of the course later. Since question 2 and question 3 is classified under CO2, if you feel like you don't want it to be too refined, you can group these 2 questions into one classification. Now your question 2 and question 3 will have a total marks of 15 marks. You may combine these 2 columns into one column, but you cannot combine CO1 and CO2 because later you're going to analyze it separately. Now done the progress test part. Let's say now we're looking into your assignment. And the assignment by nature now, it will be rather subjective in terms of the assessment. Remember previously we mentioned, when the assessment is subjective, we will need some mechanism to make it objective. The most effective way to do so, it will be by using the assessment rubrics. A typical assessment rubrics will look something like this. There shall be a list of the criteria and also different performance levels. For each criteria and each performance level, there shall be performance criteria defining the levels of achievement of the students for you to have an idea in terms of the marks to be given to the students. Now you will have to make the definitions for each performance criteria to be explicit, clear-cut, and easily differentiated. Normally, we will base on the characteristic that can be observed. Through this, we will know the levels of achievement of the students. Let's say now, this is the assessment rubrics as the simplest mode. The performance criteria has been clearly stated here, rating from 0 to 4. Now, different criteria here may have different weightage due to the level of significance. Some criteria obviously is more significant and important than the others. You can have it at the larger weightage. Since you have your assignment designated for CO2 and CO3 in this case, you will have to clearly identify which criteria is meant for which CO. Now collective marks out of different criteria for each CO will need to be in line to what you have initially designed. Ultimately, the total marks of your assignment shall be equal to what is stipulated in your course outline. Now that you have done the progress test and also the assignment, let's say if you have presentations, most likely you will need another rubrics meant to that particular presentations, which are mapped to the relevant COs. Same goes to the others as necessary. Now you have progress tests and also assignment well defined to the individual COs. How about your final exam? or final exam equivalent. For final exam equivalent, such as the capstone project, the principles it would be similar to your assignment report, especially if the assessment nature it is more towards subjective. You may design the relevant assessment with appropriate weightage, clear definitions of the performance indicator, attending to the respective COs. The things make the capstone project different from the assignment is that the rigorousness in terms of the quality assurance. Normally, capstone project will have its own moderation form, somebody to cross-check the assessment in terms of the depth, quality, components, complexity, justifiability, student learning time, and etc. There are various aspects to be considered. Since the capstone project is meant for summative assessment, by right this has to be done seriously. Better we'll have a mechanism to monitor and evaluate this as a part of the quality management system. How about the final examinations? By the time you are producing the teaching plan, most likely you haven't have your final exam paper ready. Normally, a common practice, the final examinations paper should be complete and sent to the exam unit somewhere between week 10 or 11. There are still time for you to prepare for the final exam papers. Therefore, when you define the percentage for each CO, it is nearly impossible at the teaching plan stage. But later, when you prepare your final exam papers, there should be exam moderation form. Somebody will vet through the final exam papers in terms of the quality of the exam, the coverage, the complexity, the errors, the attainment to respective COs, the levels of difficulties, and so on so forth. This shows an example content for the final exam moderation form. Different university may have different practices. The format may be different, but the principle governing it is similar. If your university is using different format, it doesn't matter. You can learn the principle behind it. These are the typical contents of the final exam moderation form. It clearly specifies the course and the details of the course. Also the details of the exam, such as the date, durations, venue, and also material required. The durations for the examinations is very much dependent to the credit hours of the course. Typically, 2 credit course will have 2 hours durations for the final exam. 3 credit hours, it will have 3 hours final exam durations. As for the dates and the venue shall be determined by the exam units. In terms of the material required, include the provisions of the standards in the case of the open book examinations, provisions of the answer script, formula sheets, graph papers, and others. This needs to be clearly indicated to the exam unit so that the relevant materials are to be provided during the exam. We talked about open book examinations in our previous video as well. The principles and the applications of those, you may refer to those videos. And then there will be a list of the documents requiring you to submit together with the exam moderation form. Among those are teaching plan, the course outline, final exam papers, and also marking scheme. The teaching plan needs to be in line with the course outline. Sometimes, especially when we have several curriculum structures running concurrent, now it is important to cross-check the content of the course outline against the teaching plan. And then when you set your final exam papers, they should be in line with the content of the teaching plan as well as the course outline. Not only that, you will need to refer to the course outcome as stipulated in those documents while setting the final exam papers. Together, there shall be marking scheme as well, which is well constructed, clear and explicit to the markers in order to ensure the consistency in terms of the rating outcome. We have discussed about final exam questions as well as the marking scheme also in our previous videos. Course outcomes are clearly indicated. And then there shall be specifications for your exam papers. These two are the specifications. The first part here, it will be the question chapter matrix. That means you indicate different questions are meant for different chapters. Let's say now in these papers you have 4 questions in total. Now each question shall meant for different chapters. Theoretically, all the chapters must be assessed unless with justifications. Among the acceptable justifications, it will be certain chapters are more appropriately assessed using the other assessment method, such as the assignment, practical tests, or other evaluations. There should be justifications if relevant chapters are not being assessed. By right, whatever topic being outlined in the course outline here shouldn't be considered redundant. You cannot simply ignore them. And whatever not being listed in the course outline, you cannot simply add them. That's why you need this table to justify that. So it should be strongly abide to the specifications as indicated in the course outline and the teaching plan. This helps us to cover the scope of the assessment. The second table here is known as the table of specification. This table is to indicate the levels of difficulty as assessed by different questions. Let's say now you have 4 questions in total here. By right, your number of questions shall also be maximum 4. You have your COs. So now the questions shall be classified in accordance to respective COs. Now how do you determine the relevant topics to be assessed under each COs? You may refer to your teaching plan in terms of the topic outcome and their relations with the respective COs. Remember, when we develop the topic outcomes, normally in the simpler form, it is meant for the monitoring of the progressions of the students. The ultimate purpose is for formation. But when it comes to the summative assessment, everything will focus on the COs. The topic outcomes are just guidelines for you to identify the relevant topics that you can assess for the final examinations. Now the depth, the breadth, the levels of difficulty will have to be aligned with the course outcomes. If the course outcome indicates to you that you need to assess up to C6, then you will make sure that respective questions will go to the C6. If the course outcome only indicated the maximum levels to C4, then you may assess the respective questions to the C4. So this will have to be well aligned with your course outcome. This is why we say the assessment will have to always be aligned with the course outcome here. And then, based on different levels, C1 to C6, this C1 to C6 represent the Bloom's taxonomy related to the cognitive. For your informations, final examinations, it will be more towards the cognitive. Therefore, we are evaluating and providing the specifications in terms of the relevant cognitive levels. Psychomotor is not suitable for final exam assessment. Normally, it will end up with practical tests. Now, once you have concluded the marks here, you will know the distributions of the table of specifications. Normally, we will like the intermediate part to carry a larger portions, while the lower end and upper end here carry slightly lower distributions. This we're going to discuss them in detail in our future videos. And you will have to classify the total marks for each COs. Why do you need to do this? And this gives you a clear indications in terms of your emphasis over different COs. The flexibility is given to you, which if you feel the CO1 is more important, you can pay more emphasis on CO1, and therefore total marks here for CO1 may be greater relative to the other COs. Now back to the weightage of different COs. Theoretically, the CO should carry the weightage similar, about equivalent weightage. Sometimes, due to certain reason, it may not be. Slight deviations may be allowed. Now, significant skew between the distributions of the CO is not recommended. For example, previously we said that, let's say now your CO1 carry 80%, CO2 15%, CO3 only 5%. This is obviously not well distributed. So in this case, the peer moderator, head of program, and also the dean may reject your proposed final exam paper. Then you will need to reconstruct the final exam paper until they are accepted. Now, how much shall the distributions of the mark be? Theoretically, it will be more or less in line with the topics, where the topics outcomes is attending to respective COs. Conceptually, the student learning time you spend on certain topic in terms of the CO1, CO2, and CO3 shall be more or less equivalent to the marks that you're going to distribute between CO1, CO2, and CO3. If the emphasis are different between the assessment and also the teaching and learning activities, this leads to the concern in terms of the misalignment between your teaching and learning activities and the assessment. Even though the scope is well aligned, but the SLT that you spend is significantly not well aligned, and you will need to justify why. Normally, when the misalignment in terms of the student-centered learning shouldn't be too significant. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of having all these three well constructed. Now, once you complete the exam moderation form, by now you will have effective breakdown of your final exam marks by the CO1, CO2, and CO3. Now you may check back from your initial teaching plan here, at least 2 assessment methods for 1 CO. So you're going to make sure there must be questions for CO1 here, because you have only 1 assessment method for CO1 if you do not have this. Theoretically, as the summative assessment, all the CO that can be assessed through cognitive must be assessed. It is unless the CO is psychomotor, which cannot be assessed at the levels of final examination. If that is the case, you may put in a note here indicating that the respective COs is not cognitive based, therefore it is not suitable to be assessed in the final exam. I would say that the exam moderation form is a good tool to facilitate the planning and the design for the assessment so that it meets the purpose of the program, keeping it well aligned with the teaching and learning activities as well as the course outcome. You may say it is pure documentations, but if you look at the perspective of the program manager, such as your head of program or CQI committee, you will appreciate the importance of it. And then later there will be a list of the evaluations to check your final exam questions as well as the marking scheme. Among the checking criteria include the ambiguities, the errors or mistakes, whether in line with the teaching plan and the course outline, whether the TOS is well constructed, whether the intended levels of difficulty is fulfilled, and so on and so forth. This will involve the peer moderator, which are going to be your colleague lecturers. They will look into your final exam questions as well as your marking schemes, whether the marking schemes is clearly indicating how the marks are being assigned, and if there is any recommendations for the improvements of the exam questions, the peer moderator may give constructive comments. Finally, there will be recommendations and approvals. Recommendations by the peer moderator, approval by the head of program, and endorsement by the dean. Now, if the quality of the papers is not meeting the requirement, or if there is still errors require rectifications, whole thing will have to go back to the lecturer for amendment. After the corrections, submit back to the head of program and the dean. If it is being rejected by the peer moderator, now the moderations process will have to start again. If the moderator accepted, and the following acceptance will have to based on the head of program and the dean. They may have other concerns rejecting your paper. If any stage here reject your papers, you have to restart the entire process. If everything goes smoothly with little amendment, after done the amendment, submit to the head, to the dean's office, and eventually to the exam unit. This is about the quality management system in ensuring the summative assessment is properly done.